Well, in this episode of Newt's World, with no relief from high home prices and rents, more and more state legislators are interested in pursuing housing reform. As a result, state legislatures set new records for the number and strength of new laws intended to unlock home building. In his new policy brief for the Mercatus Center, Framing Futures, Pro-Housing Legislation Goes Vertical in 2025, Salim Furth describes how states passed record-breaking housing reforms in 2025, easing parking rules and zoning across the United States. I'm really pleased to welcome my guest, Salim Furth. He is a senior research fellow and director of the Urbanity project at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. His research focuses on housing production and land use regulation. He frequently advises local governments and testifies before state and federal legislatures. He earned his PhD in economics from the University of Rochester. Salim, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Thank you so much, Speaker Gingrich.
Can you describe briefly what is the Urbanity Project?
Yeah, we are a small group of researchers within this research center at George Mason University. It's a public university in Virginia, but we are kind of independently funded. We are liberty-minded, oriented towards markets. Somebody once described us as we're the people in Washington who say that markets are the problem and markets are the solution. Another way we describe ourselves is bridging the gap between academic ideas and real-world problems.
A new Wall Street Journal poll found that only 25% of Americans believe they have a good chance of improving their standard of living. That's a record low since that survey began in 1987. What do you think is behind this sharp decline in optimism?
That's amazing. That's really sad. Home prices are just the biggest thing in almost anyone's budget, and especially young people. When I talk to folks younger than me, like my little brother's age, they hardly believe that they are ever going to be able to buy a home in the areas where they grew up or in the areas where they work now. I was watching a panel with a young legislator in New Hampshire, Joe Alexander, and he said that his cohort, he's about 30 now, and his college friends, he is still the only one who owns a home. And these are, smart young people. They went to college. They did things the right way, right? The way that society told them, if you stay in school, get a degree, work hard, you're going to get the American dream. And most of them are renting.
One of the surveys indicates that nearly 70% of Americans now say the American dream, that if you work hard, you'll get ahead, no longer holds true or maybe never did. What does this say about the current economic situation and the kind of experiences they're having in life?
I do think it used to. When I read older books or policy papers written by generations before me, even before you, it was taken for granted that you could leave your farm or leave your country an ocean away, come to an American city, work hard, and either you or perhaps your children would have the American dream of owning a piece of land, the house on top of it, and essentially controlling your own future. Because I think that's what it is. It's not being anyone's servant and not being anyone's boss. We're not feudal lords and we're not feudal peasants. We are people in control of our own lives, making our way day by day. And I think that's the core of the American dream. And fundamental to that is being able to live somewhere where you have control of your own property. And that means ownership.
But if that belief has declined that dramatically, that has huge implications for the future of the country.
That's right. And it means young people are going to be supportive of radical solutions, left and right. People are willing to say, well, just burn it all down. It's not working for me. And I think that's really sad because if you look at most of the high-level numbers, if you look at, well, how's our unemployment? Well, we're doing really well. We've had low unemployment through major economic shocks, through COVID. We've managed to sort of ride that out, and our economic policymakers deserve a great deal of credit for that. We have high rates of education, lower rates of teen pregnancy, lower rates of crime in our big cities. Like, a lot of things are going really, really well. And the one big thing that is blocking people from feeling like they are fully in control of their lives is that they can't afford to buy a house. I really think that's kind of a linchpin in a society that's otherwise enjoying record levels of abundance. If I press a few buttons on a little computer in my pocket, someone will send me a new pair of shoes or a burrito to my house. That's phenomenal. And yet, if I don't have the house, all of that feels a little bit empty.
The Wall Street Journal poll found that fewer than 1/4 of the respondents said they were very confident they could buy a home if they wanted to. 56%, over half, said they had little or no confidence they could buy a home. How central is this both to the housing crisis and to the sense of the economy not working?
I think it's absolutely central. Other things are working fine, right? People have jobs. They're getting paid better than their parents were, better than their grandparents. But especially if they're in a high productivity coastal city with the great biotech jobs or the great jobs in Silicon Valley, they're looking at, while their wages may have doubled in a generation, home prices have quadrupled. And, you can do a couple things. So one thing that a lot of people are doing is moving to the Sun Belt, right? They're moving to San Antonio or Atlanta or Jacksonville, where the job opportunities aren't quite as good, but the home prices are much more reasonable. Or they're staying put in a place like Buffalo, New York, or Flint, Michigan, where the job opportunities are distinctly poor, but there's a lot of kind of older housing. And if you don't mind, dealing with some repairs, you can have a big place. Or they're doubling up, tripling up, renting in the big cities and keeping that job and having, again, lots of good things in their lives, but not be able to make that next step and say, hey, now I own my own condominium, my own townhouse, my own single family home on a quarter acre, and I'm going to get married and I'm going to have children. So those steps, I think, are really blocked for people who want to have upward mobility and live in the most expensive cities.
I'm very curious, when we see the declining birth rates for Americans, to what extent do you think that is a function of the inability to buy a home and have a sense that you could actually have a secure future?
It has to matter. I don't think we have a good number that we can put on it yet. I know some really smart researchers who are working on this question, but we know, for example, that the price of cars is a barrier to having a third child because it's expensive to get a car that fits 3 kids. A house is a lot more than a car, and kids take up a lot of space in a house. I got 5 kids myself, so I know a thing or two about this. And if you can't get a place with a couple of bedrooms, nobody's going to have kids living in a 1-bedroom apartment. We need 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom places of all kinds. And that's why I'm excited about townhouses. I think those are the house type that's the cheapest, that's the entry level for that 26-year-old who's like, I found the person I want to spend my life with. I want to have children, but I need a bedroom for the kids to live in. It can't not matter. It has to matter.
In your analysis, how central do you think this idea of being able to own property to the whole fabric of what has been historically America?
Yeah, it's very important because, like I said, my conception of what it means to have the American dream of being middle class, it's not being a lord, not being a peasant. It's having control of yourself. And to do that, you need to have some control of the property that you live on. Renting is great. I have nothing against renters. There's an important time of your life for moving, trying out a new place, trying out a new job. I never want to sound like I'm putting a slur on that, because the other aspect of the American dream is mobility, right? It's that ability to pick up, move across the country. People used to do that when they couldn't even send a letter home reliably. And now, bizarrely, we're moving, as best we can tell, less than Americans have ever moved. And it's easier than it's ever been. Load your possessions in the car, drive across the country. It's safe and easy compared to what our forebears went through. And yet we don't do it. And a big part of that is that the places with opportunity are too expensive.
There's a large part of that just sheer price, that people just can't afford to do it.
There's a young lady I've known since she was a 12-year-old. She's babysat my kids. She's now spreading her wings, moving out of her parents' home. And she wants to be an actress. And you can think of all the generations of talented young women who've moved out to Los Angeles and tried to make it in Hollywood. And the odds aren't great, but gosh, that's such an American story. And that's what she wanted to do. And she looked at it, she gave it a serious look, and she said, I can't even get an apartment anywhere near Hollywood. And it's not worth pursuing my dream there. I'm going to go to a secondary city. Atlanta has kind of a second or third tier film industry. And I'm going to try to break in through doing commercials or smaller TV shows in Atlanta. And it's so sad that someone with a big dream, an unlikely dream, she wants to make it to the big leagues. And instead, she's going to settle for hoping to make it in the minors because she can't afford a single room to rent in a great American city.
You've pointed out from your work that part of the response has been a tremendous increase in state legislative efforts to increase housing supply. I mean, the numbers that you've reported, where you go from like 10 housing supply bills passed in the last 6 months of 22 to 104 housing supply bills passed in the last 6 months. What's happening at the state level?
And that's the good news, is that we aren't the only people who understand this. And I think state legislators in the last 2, maybe 3 election cycles, they've had a new plank in their platforms. Democrats and Republicans, they're telling their voters, I'm going to do something about the cost of living, about the cost of housing, about homeownership. They didn't used to say that, right? This was just not part of the job of being a state rep. And now it is, because that's the biggest problem in their constituents' lives. And so once they've told their voters, I'm going to do something, then they come to people like me and they say, hey, Salim, what do I do? How do I untie this knot, bring homeownership back into the realm of possibilities, open up the rentals that someone like my former babysitter could take? We've given them good advice. Lots of other folks, researchers, advocates are out there giving them good advice. And I think it's actually really important to note there are bad ideas, right? There are ideas like, well, let's just ban Wall Street investments in housing. Well, those are small potatoes. You wouldn't do much of anything anyway. Or let's use rent control. Let's just stop the rents. So Zoran Mondani wants to do this in New York City. Well, that's counterproductive.
Explain why it's counterproductive.
Rent control at best stops your rent from going up. Well, it's really high to begin with. So at best, you get a declining product, right? Your apartment kind of gets worse and worse over time. So there's still apartments in New York City, the really rent-controlled ones, that don't even have hot water, because then they got rent control in the 40s. They didn't have hot water, and it's never been worth the landlord's money to put in hot water and get back a few bucks a month. And so you want to extend this system to every apartment in New York City. Again, at best, you're freezing the rents. That's not good enough. If you go to a place where they're actually building a lot of housing and they say, we're going to let it rip, we're going to let developers come in here, make money, build towers, build townhouses, build subdivisions, then guess what? The rent goes down. That's the story in Denver. That's the story in Austin. The rent is actually falling. Even in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I live, it's been a place that has embraced growth. And the result is, on average, rents fall over time. They don't rise. And so we can do better than rent control. The market actually can beat rent control. And so instead, you do rent control, you get a falling quality and stagnating prices instead of rising quality and falling prices, which is what you can get from a market.
Why is it so hard to explain that in a place like New York?
Because they've poisoned the well for so long. They've made it so hard to build for so long. They've completely forgotten what a functional market looks like. So when they're thinking about, oh, well, if I don't have the government on my side beating up on my landlord, then my landlord is going to put me over a barrel. And that's true because they haven't let anyone compete with their landlord. But if they said, hey, your landlord could try to get you over a barrel, but hey, there's a new building opening up a block away and the condos there are 25% cheaper than your apartment. So you can go buy a condo because we let people build a ton of new ones and they're trying to get them off their hands. And that's what happens when you let a market work, is you will have producers competing on price and you'll get lower rents and lower prices and rising quality instead of the opposite.
But as I understand it, in New York, there is currently no possibility of passing that kind of positive reform.
Mayor Eric Adams, he had a number of issues, and there's a reason he's losing his seat. But he looked like he was going to make some serious steps towards allowing more housing. He had a City of Yes agenda, which was mostly positive. It wasn't about rent control. And there's a ballot initiative, actually, that should go before the voters, which would remove the prerogative of city councilors to unilaterally kill any project in their district And guess what? The city council is trying to keep the voters from having the chance of voting on this ballot measure. So that's a big fight. We'll see how it plays out. But there's at least a chance that the voters of New York City will be able to take this into their own hands and at least make some steps towards allowing more construction.
How much does the not in my backyard attitude slow down everything that raised costs? I was very struck in 1996. We did a Republican National Convention in San Diego, and I'd been working with Jimmy Carter on Habitat for Humanity. So we decided we would build a Habitat for Humanity in San Diego, and the cost of the permits was greater than the total cost of building the same house in Georgia. So it was a great education for me, because here we are, we're trying to help a poor family earn the right to have a decent house by helping them build a house. And it's quite clear that San Diego County had no interest in affordable housing for poor people.
That's right. One of my friends helps run Habitat for Humanity in Austin, Texas. And at a certain point, he just gave up on buying land. It had become so expensive, and they don't have fees like that in Texas, but the land prices, because land that you were allowed to build on had become so scarce and so much demand, he could not make it make sense for his organization for a couple of years. And so instead, he worked with me and others to bring good ideas to the Texas state legislature. So one of the things they did is they capped fees. Another thing is they said, in the big Texas cities, you have to allow small lot sizes. You can't say every home needs a quarter acre. You've got to be able to go down to 3,000 square feet, which is like a large townhouse lot or a small lot for a small habitat type home. That's going to make sense for Habitat Austin and the other big Texas cities. If they can find a site that's undeveloped, they can say, okay, we can put on a half-acre site. Now we can put 6 or 7 homes instead of 1 or 2. And then all of a sudden the math makes sense for them. And those kind of starter homes, even if you're not a charity. So Lennar, one of the biggest home builders, they're building tiny homes in Texas because Texas has passed laws, state and local, to say, we want to have entry-level home ownership. We understand this is not most people's dream to own a little house on a postage stamp the size of an apartment. Sure. But maybe that's where your dream starts. You start building equity, you get control, and eventually you can build an addition on that tiny house.
From that standpoint, what does that do to the fear of people in existing houses that their home value will go down?
We've made people 2 promises in this country, and they're incompatible. One is that their home price will always go up, and the other is that their children will be able to afford to buy a house. And there's some middle ground where you have a stable asset and you're able to sell your home for a little bit more than you bought it to account for inflation, but your children with their incomes can still buy homes. And that bargain's broken down. It's obviously broken in one direction. And so I think people like you and I who own our homes, we have to accept that it's not going to be a hedge fund. It might be stable. It's a stable store of value. It's a place to live. It'll continue to be a good place. The reality is building a few more homes in your neighborhood does not tank your home price, and accepting that something, maybe not literally in your backyard, but across the street or 3 blocks away in what you kind of thought of as open space, but was actually just somebody's land, and that person wants to subdivide their land and put a townhouse development, and saying, if we don't build this kind of thing, my children will never be able to afford a home in this community. And accepting that and saying supply and demand are going to keep prices moderate, and that's okay. Moderate growth is okay. I don't need my house to be a hedge fund.
So you track these reforms. It looks like on the surface that Texas may be the most reform-oriented state legislature.
It was their first time, their first real, stepping into the rodeo and making some big things happen. They passed, I think, 7, 8, 9 bills this year, really impressive ones. But there's other states that have been working on this for a long time. California, to its credit, they were in the deepest hole, and they've been trying to climb their way out of it for the longest. They're still in a hole. You don't want to be where California is, but I give them credit for trying to work in the right direction. Montana and Washington State, though, are actually my champions.
What made the difference? Why did those two coalesce and suddenly become very reform-oriented?
So in Montana, right, it's a red state, but they have included the Democrats in reform efforts. And a big part of that was, especially after COVID, and actually I just was chatting with Senator Danny Zolnikoff from Montana. He said, gosh, I hate the show Yellowstone. It was the hit show when everyone was stuck at home during COVID and hated their condos in California. And so they all moved to Montana. And it doesn't take a lot of Californians to be a big number of people in Montana. And they came with all this home equity that they had from selling what they owned in California and brought it. And they could just outbid almost any local Montanan. And so they'll complain about it. Like, you can complain, but there's a U.S. Constitution. You can't stop people from moving to your state. What you can do is say, we're going to make it really easy to build houses. So we can have brand new homes for the people who loved Yellowstone on TV and want to move out here. And they can buy those $800,000 brand new homes. And let's keep the existing Montana homes at 300, 400, where at least a Montanan has a fighting chance. And then eventually, if we do enough and maybe people forget about Yellowstone, then those prices start to come back down to where they were.
But Montana is a huge state. You have a lot of space in Montana for people to still show up.
You do, but I think this is interesting. People don't want to live in the middle of nowhere. They don't even want to live in a lot of the kind of boring prairie towns, right? So you get Billings or Great Falls. Those aren't having the boom that Missoula and Bozeman, which are near the mountains, are having. So people want to live where there's beautiful views of the mountains and some nice local amenities. They want to have a grocery store and a hospital reasonably. And they want to be able to walk some places and not just do the half-hour drive in if they bought a ranch in the country. And that's true not just in Montana, but nationally. People want to have walkability. And that means building houses near where other people are, right? If it was just a matter of like, well, can we build a few more homes on some ranches 20 miles from town? That wouldn't have been an issue. But the demand was for more homes in town. And that's where you have to kind of balance these interests and say, hey, for Montanans who own their homes, if you want your kids to be able to live in town and you want to see your grandkids, you have to build some homes for Californians too. And that's a tough trade-off. I really applaud Montanans for coming together across party lines and saying, we can only build our way out of this. We cannot complain our way out of it.
Some people have been suggesting that the federal government owns so much land, for example, in Nevada, that you could literally build entire new cities. I mean, is that plausible?
I mean, you could. Building new cities is a fraught endeavor. It works once in a while, but usually it fails. So you were probably in office as part of passing the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act. So that's a great model, had bipartisan roots with your involvement and Harry Reid's, and it should just be expanded nationally. There's no other big city that's as much federally constrained as Las Vegas. Like Las Vegas, if you go to the last subdivision and throw a rock, it lands in federal land all the way around the city.
I think the feds own like 90-something% of Nevada. That's astonishing.
Right. Nevada needed it the most, but other cities need this too. And there's federal land around some of the smaller cities in Utah, Idaho, Montana. It's not as much. It's not as severe. It's not perfect, but it works. The Southern Nevada, I don't know, Snippelma, that's what they call it. It works. And just taking that model national and saying, hey, anywhere that the feds own land, you should be able to sell that land to a private developer who has a plan to bring water and sewer, turn it into urban or suburban space. And then the feds are able to take that revenue and improve conservation land that's really special, right? The places that are beautiful, the national parks where we need upkeep and amenities. It creates a revenue stream and is able to improve public land in Nevada. And so it's really a win-win for conservation and home prices. But I think it can be overstated. There's all this land, but as I said in Montana, most people don't want to live a 20-mile drive from the grocery store. And so the amount of demand that you can siphon off on federal land is moderate.
Given everything that's going on, do you expect the pace of reform to accelerate or to slow in 26?
It's a great question. So election years are usually a little bit down. It might be about the same level because I think there's a general upward trend. We've seen every year for the last 4 or 5 years, rising interest, rising numbers of states that are saying this is our problem too. And home prices don't seem to be falling. The thing that would really take the wind out of it is if home prices collapsed, if we had a big recession and everybody shifted their focus from cost of living to unemployment, for instance. But aside from the election issue will take some people away. People don't want to take big risks. They're spending more of their time out on the campaign trail. I think we'll be at least moderately up in 26. And I think we'll see states in the middle of the country, right? We talked to people in Michigan and Iowa these are not booming coastal economies, but they still feel the pinch. And so they are leaning in and saying, we need some of these same solutions. And we didn't think we needed to economize, but we need to make sure that you can build a backyard cottage in Des Moines, or that you can have a HUD code manufactured home installed anywhere in Michigan, because sometimes the price of construction is just too great.
The struggle between the classic stick-built housing and the capacity to have factory-built housing has been a real tension point. And it always seemed to me that the potential for dramatically better factory-built homes that frankly were indistinguishable from the classic is there, and is something we probably should use a lot more of.
Yes, there are a few reforms moving right now, so to make HUD code factory-built homes a little bit more like stick-built ones. Part of it is that moving the work indoors doesn't save you that much, right? It helps a little bit in cold climates, but then you have the cost of shipping. So there hasn't been huge savings without a lot of automation. So there are some entrepreneurs who are trying to make factory built much more productive by using advanced manufacturing techniques, the kinds of things that the administration is kind of trying to bring back to the US technically. We'll see how that works. You've still got to deliver this product, which is very large and cumbersome, to a home site. The stick built will always have the advantage that you can move the lumber as lumber instead of moving it as a house.
If the wave of reforms that you monitor and you encourage, if they continue, say, for the next 10 or 15 years, what do you think housing in America will look like 15 years from now?
Oh, I love that question. So I think if you're in Texas or Arizona, you won't notice at all, because essentially what they're doing there is trying to protect what they've had for decades. And they're trying to fight back against recent increases in regulation. When I talk to people in Arizona, they're just trying to get back to 2019. If you're in Massachusetts or Maryland, certainly in California, it could be a totally radical shift. You could be seeing completely new types of housing, innovations. You could be seeing kinds of neighborhoods that literally have not been built since the 50s. You could be seeing a lot more tall apartment buildings because there's so much demand for space that if you take your renters and spread them out, they're just going to take up a lot of space. And you say, well, when we've got mass transit systems and major cities with hundreds of thousands of jobs in a narrow space, we need to build 30-story buildings by those transit stations. So you might see completely different looks in some of those places because they need so much change. They have been sitting it out for 50 years, and it's going to be a lot of catch up for them.
Do you think that from a young person's standpoint, they'll have a better opportunity, the generation that grows up, say 15 years from now, will have a better opportunity to buy a house?
100%. I mean, I'd be very sad if it was not the case. You know, if I meet somebody just in general conversation, if they are younger than me, they almost always agree with me on policy. That's like, doesn't matter whether they're lefty or righty, whether they're from the middle of the country, the coasts, they just instinctively say, oh, we need to build more housing. None of my friends can afford a home. And if I meet somebody who's my parents' age, unless they have kids who are in this process, they might have tuned out. They might have been like, well, things are fine. My property taxes are a little too high. That's my only complaint. And they can be a little checked out and they can sometimes miss it. I'm really encouraged when I do meet someone in that generation. I actually met someone at the playground last night. It was a grandfather of some playmates of my children. And he gets it. He lives in Oakland, California, and he gets it. And he said, we need your stuff in Oakland because nobody can afford a house.
Salim, I want to thank you for joining me. This is a really important question about the whole future of the country, because if we lose a generation that no longer believes the American dream is possible, then it's ironically on our 250th anniversary as a country, we're really putting the whole country at risk. Your policy brief, Framing Futures Pro-Housing Legislation Goes Vertical in 2025, is available now for citizens across the country who are interested in helping solve this problem. You can go to Mercatus.org, and I think you'll find that this brief really gives you some ideas for your state and your legislature. And Salim, I want to thank you for joining me.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, it's been a privilege. I really look forward to continuing this conversation with a lot of other people, too.
Thank you to my guest, Salim Furth. You can get a link to his policy brief, Framing Futures, Pro-Housing Legislation Goes Vertical in 2025, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.